Sometimes, wanting something you can't have should simply remain a wish, because not every dream coming true is a blessing. I learned this lesson the hard way, and to this day, I can't help but feel a deep sense of regret when I reflect on everything that happened. A year ago, at the age of 36, I was the sales director at one of New York's top cosmetic companies. My husband, Ethan, 62, was the owner of the company where I worked. From the moment we met, he was impressed by my skills and captivated by my personality. Long story short, within a month, I had him head over heels and he proposed. Of course, I said yes. Who wouldn't want to marry the wealthiest bachelor in the city? Despite the 26-year age gap between us, Ethan and I never faced any major problems in our relationship. He was incredibly patient with my complaints, making sure arguments were rare and never escalated into full-blown fights. He knew me inside and out, my likes, dislikes, even my deepest secrets. But what he didn't know was that boredom was gradually consuming me, and I was secretly stalking my old high school crush, Oliver, online. Oliver, 36, was a crush I had never truly gotten over until now. Whenever his name came up, I would get all giddy like a teenage girl because 1, he had the most mesmerizing eyes, and 2, he made me feel special with a single dance at prom, when no one else would even consider taking me as their date. That night changed everything for me. You can't easily forget the person who made you feel worthy on one of the most important nights of your teenage years. So, you can imagine how heartbroken I was when I found out he had married a church friend 6 years ago. I honestly thought I was far prettier than her, and I was sure everyone was thinking, why her? That was probably why I accepted Ethan's proposal without hesitation. A year later, when Ethan asked me to marry him, I was certain my chance with Oliver was long gone, or so I thought. Then one day, a former classmate messaged me with the news that Oliver and his wife were getting a divorce. I nearly dropped my coffee in shock. This was the kind of news that rattled you. But I knew this was my opportunity to make a move. After a month, I reached out to him and started a casual conversation. Soon, I found myself offering to help him in any way I could as he tried to move forward with his life. I had to hold back my excitement about reconnecting with him, but truth be told, I was willing to give up almost everything at that point. Everything, including my marriage. Stupid, right? But honestly, any woman in my shoes would have done the same. After weeks of casual chatting with little progress, I decided to step things up. I invited Oliver to dinner while Ethan was away on one of his business trips, and he agreed. I wore my most beautiful dress and the boldest red lipstick for our date. The next thing I knew, we were in a hotel room together. We continued seeing each other over the next 3 months. I have to admit, being with him felt amazing, just as I had imagined. But then, something didn't feel quite right. For starters, he confided that his business was struggling and that he needed $100,000 to cover his losses. A week later, he asked to borrow my Bentley for a week to impress potential investors, and he needed another $100,000, this time for his mother's surgery. I kept giving in to his requests, but deep down, I knew I was being played for my money. What I didn't realize was that Ethan had already figured everything out. Yes, my husband knew it all. He knew exactly what I was doing on social media every day. He knew I was stalking Oliver's profile, knew which dress I wore the first time I met up with him. He was fully aware of my long-standing crush on Oliver, but he never confronted me about it. All those business trips Ethan had been taking were actually just setups, tests to see if I would be unfaithful while he was away. I passed the test for the first 4 years, but in the 5th year, he finally caught me in the act with the man I had been fantasizing about. Ethan didn't confront me. When he returned home, he completely ignored me, walking past as if I didn't even exist. I knocked on his door until my knuckles ached, but he never opened it. The messages I sent through chat apps went unanswered. I was desperate to talk, to beg for his forgiveness, but by then, it was far too late. The next day, at work, my staff gathered around, watching a video of me kissing Oliver. Fearing more clips might surface, I quickly grabbed the remote and turned off the screen. That same day, I received a termination letter with no severance pay, citing unauthorized fund withdrawals. The bank manager called to inform me that my accounts had been closed, and when I arrived home later that evening, my belongings were piled up outside the gate. Seriously? I was kicked out of my own home after 5 years of giving him everything in bed. Was I really such a terrible wife that he couldn't treat me with some decency? Did he expect me to believe he had never cheated while away on business trips? Now, a year later, I have nothing. No money, no family, and nowhere to turn. I've tried reaching out to Ethan, but every time I get close, he slams the door shut in my face. If only I could go back in time, I would never have gotten involved with Oliver. He wasn't worth sacrificing my whole life for. My name's Caleb, and I've been dating my girlfriend, Lila, for about 2 years. Our relationship started when I accidentally overheard her having an honest conversation with her close friend. I've been thinking about asking her to marry me. Lila is one of those women who tends to go unnoticed in a crowd. At first glance, you might not realize just how beautiful and caring she really is. She tends to hide her figure under oversized clothes because she dislikes the attention her nearly perfect shape attracts. But if you're lucky enough to get to know her, you'll quickly see the depth of her beauty and warmth. We met at a New Year's Eve party hosted by a mutual friend. I had no idea that this brief encounter would blossom into a love story. We discovered a lot of shared interests, and although she didn't immediately charm me, I worked up the courage to ask her out. After a week, we started dating, and a few months later, she surprised me by coming over to my place. Wanting to make the evening special, I prepared a delicious dinner while we watched a movie together on my couch. What started as sweet gestures soon turned into passionate kisses. Before I knew it, we were in my bed, and I was astonished at how uninhibited Lila turned out to be. She was fearless, adventurous, and willing to push boundaries. I was overwhelmed, struggling to keep up with her, but our bond grew stronger than ever. After that night, things weren't always smooth sailing. I tend to forget or overlook things unintentionally, which hurt her feelings. On the flip side, Lila, like many women, sometimes did things that frustrated me. We didn't live together, mainly due to her parents' influence. Even though we were close, she felt that moving in together would complicate her relationship with them. Out of love and respect for her, I never pushed the issue. But one day, I overheard a conversation between her and her friend that filled me with fear and guilt. It became clear that I struggled to remember important dates, like anniversaries or Valentine's Day, often only realizing my mistake days later. After one such oversight, Lila left me while I was in the bathroom. I was shocked to learn she called Nina. I had thought our relationship was doing well. She confided in Nina that I had forgotten Valentine's Day, which made her doubt my feelings for her. She started to think I was just keeping her around. I felt a deep sense of responsibility for what had happened. Lila said she was disappointed, citing my poor memory as the reason. She asked why an attractive guy who couldn't remember important things should matter to her, and said if I forgot Valentine's Day again, she would end the relationship. There was a heavy silence that seemed to carry a lot of weight for Nina. Reflecting on Nina's support, Lila wished she had reached out for advice sooner, but she doubted Nina's sincerity. I felt like Nina was trying to drive a wedge between Lila and me, which only fueled my anger. Instead of acknowledging my faults in dating and relationships, I blamed Nina. Lila continued to express that the issue went beyond just Valentine's Day. My forgetfulness was becoming a source of frustration for her. She had to remind me about important dates, and she felt that if I could just remember one date and surprise her, she wouldn't doubt how much she meant to me. Sometimes, she felt like she was nothing more than an object of convenience, easily forgotten. After a long conversation, she said goodbye to Nina, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Nina had ulterior motives. My dislike for her only grew. Who did she think she was, trying to come between Lila and me? My anger intensified, perhaps leading to the events that followed. Later that day, after dropping Lila off at her place, I turned to my friend Victor for advice, hoping he could help me make sense of things. Unfortunately, he wasn't much help. It seemed like he was actually hoping Lila and I would break up so he could make his move on her. As I mulled it over, Nathan came to mind. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I thought he might be able to offer the insight I needed. With plans to propose to Lila, I found myself clinging desperately to our relationship. I had planned to bring it up after a shower on that important day, but my plans were thrown off when I accidentally overheard a conversation. Thankfully, Nathan proved to be a real friend. He gave me valuable advice and guidance. Knowing I had trouble with my memory, I made sure to jot down the important details. As soon as I left his place, I wasted no time taking action to secure a future with Lila. I remembered Lila's favorite restaurant and immediately made a reservation. It occurred to me that Nina had mentioned this place too. Looking back, I couldn't help but wonder if she was subtly bragging about her boyfriend taking her there, implying that I couldn't do the same for Lila. But I wasn't going to waste any more time thinking about it. I finalized the booking and made the payment right away. While I was shopping for a special gift for Lila, I came across a beautiful brooch. But while I was at the jewelry store, I couldn't resist browsing through the wedding ring collection and ended up picking out a breathtaking engagement ring with diamonds. It was pricey, so I had to transfer money from my savings at the bank to make the purchase. Afterward, I bought a new suit, relying on a helpful salesperson to guide me, since I'm not exactly a fashion expert. I was surprised when, after trying it on, a group of women nearby started whispering compliments. Despite their kind words, I felt uneasy. To shake off the discomfort, I decided to get another suit and even visited the barber for a fresh hairstyle. This was a big step for me, as I usually prefer a simple, low-maintenance look. But Nathan insisted it was necessary. Later that evening, Lila couldn't help but compliment my new hairstyle, clearly noticing the change. She asked why I had decided to do it, and I casually explained that I thought she'd like it and was simply tired of my old style. Lila seemed curious about the sudden transformation and pressed me further, asking why I'd gotten bored of my previous look. Her questions caught me off guard, and I found myself feeling a bit unprepared for her curiosity. Today, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she and Nina had spent too much time together, as I sensed some tension. Normally, I feel confident around Lila, but in that moment, I was nervous. It felt like I was asking her out for the first time, especially since I was inviting her to a special Valentine's Day dinner. I could feel the pressure building as I tried to navigate the conversation. Then Lila asked if I was doing okay and if I was inviting her to a romantic dinner. I confirmed that I was, and asked what was so strange about us going out together. I reminded her that this was the first time I had asked her out for Valentine's Day, and that I simply wanted to show her that I had planned something special. I added that if she wasn't up for it, I could cancel. When I asked Lila about her plans for Valentine's Day, she said she didn't have anything special planned, just going to a party with Nina. But since I had invited her, she agreed to go with me instead. I couldn't help but ask if there was anything she wanted to tell me about Nina or the party, feeling uneasy about what might be going on between them. Lila noticed my concern and addressed it, asking what had been bothering me lately. She reminded me of her long history with Nina and mentioned that if I wasn't planning anything for Friday, she'd made plans with her. She tried to downplay it, but I could tell she was a little upset. I had to admit that, yes, I probably seemed jealous, but that was the truth. I was scared of losing the person I loved most in the world. That evening, Lila decided to come home early, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was going to end our relationship. She seemed distant, unlike her usual self. As I reflected on the week, I realized we hadn't spent much time together. When Friday morning arrived, everything seemed to be falling apart. I got a call from the restaurant while I was at work, informing me that my reservation had been canceled. A wealthy man had booked the entire place, demanding that all other orders be canceled. I tried to argue, but it was useless. The waiter was firm, canceling my order and returning the money. Panicking, I scrambled to find another place, but everything was fully booked. I felt a wave of hopelessness wash over me. Reluctantly, I began to accept that a cozy, romantic dinner at home would have to do. But then came a second call that shattered everything. There had been a fire in my apartment building. The apartment below mine had burned to the ground, and everything in my place, my clothes, my personal items, was destroyed by smoke and water. I had nothing left. I had to find somewhere else to live. As I sat back in my office chair, a wave of emptiness overwhelmed me. In a matter of minutes, my whole life had unraveled. This was beyond repair. Then it hit me. The engagement ring I had planned to propose with was sitting on my dresser in that now ruined apartment. I immediately left work and rushed to what was left of my home. What used to be a cozy space was now a charred ruin. My belongings had turned to ashes. Standing where my chest of drawers once was, I saw a massive hole that led to the basement. I sat on the curb, burying my head in my hands, wondering what other calamities awaited me. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. Out of nowhere, I saw Lila driving by in my so-called friend Victor's Jeep. She quickly looked away, avoiding eye contact as she passed me in my distressed state. I realized then that I had lost her. Victor, the so-called friend, had taken advantage of the situation. Later, as I rummaged through the trash, I was surprised to find the ring still safely tucked away in its box. Felt like a small victory, but it barely seemed to matter in the grand scheme of things. I made my way to my parents' house in the suburbs to freshen up. I still had some clothes there, outdated, but they would do. After enduring their constant chatter, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to head back into the city, eventually ending up at Nathan's place. Nathan and his wife welcomed me warmly, expressing concern for what I was going through. I shared everything with Nathan, and we had dinner together. In the middle of the meal, the phone rang. Nathan handed it to me, saying it was Nina and that I should take the call. Answering the phone, I was flooded with emotions. Anger, disappointment, and deep resentment. I bitterly accused Lila, asking if she was gloating over my misfortune. I even insinuated that she might be responsible for the fire. The thought that my true love could be with someone else was overwhelming. My words were harsh, and I lashed out at Nina, who seemed genuinely surprised by my outburst. She denied any ill intentions and reassured me that Lila still loved me, despite my doubts. She also expressed sympathy for what had happened to my apartment and explained that she'd just learned about the fire and had been trying to reach me all day. I couldn't believe she'd only just found out. I told Nina about seeing Lila drive by in Victor's Jeep when I was sitting on the curb, and how she avoided me when she saw my state. My anger boiled over, and I abruptly hung up the phone, ignoring Nathan and his wife's attempts to calm me down. I thanked them and left, heading straight to the bar to drown my sorrows in alcohol. Nathan understood the gravity of the situation, but I couldn't hold it together anymore. I went to the VC, a place I used to visit before Lila came into my life. The irony of that name hit me hard, reminding me of everything that had gone wrong. I drank heavily, far more than I should have, as the bartender reluctantly continued to serve me. Then, unexpectedly, Lila and Nina walked in. Lila with red eyes, clearly upset, and Nina looking furious. But at that point, I didn't care anymore. I sat there, numb, savoring my last glass of whiskey. The bartender avoided my table, sensing my bitterness. Lila approached me, trying to comfort me with a hug, but I pushed her away, furious that she even dared. I demanded to know if this was because she'd been riding in Victor's Jeep earlier. I was consumed by anger, accusing her of fooling around with him. Lila tried to reason with me, insisting that I was drunk and not thinking clearly. She suggested we go back to her place to talk things over. In a haze of mixed emotions, I stubbornly declared that we would talk right then and there or not at all. Despite my anger and intoxication, I couldn't bring myself to utter anything as harsh as calling her trash. Deep down, I was sure she had betrayed me, but my love for her still ran too deep to let me speak those words. For the first time, Nina approached me, expressing her disappointment. She said that if I weren't so drunk and desperate, she might have reacted differently. Nina urged me to drop my ego, telling me Lila adored me, and I was pushing her away. She suggested I rest and talk things over calmly in the morning. I spoke about Nina's presence in my life over the last 2 years. I acknowledged that, in her eyes, I had always been surrounded by negativity, and she had hoped from the start that I would end up with Lila. I finished my glass and grabbed the last one on the bar, drinking it down. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and my thoughts blurred. Eventually, I lost consciousness. The bartender and the girls helped carry me to Lila's car. When I woke up the next morning, I was greeted by a pounding headache. Slowly, I stumbled out of bed and made my way to the bathroom. After a while, I was able to move around more easily. To my surprise, My clothes were washed and neatly folded on a chair in the corner of the room. As I got dressed, I realized my pockets were empty. When I stepped into the kitchen, I found Nina and Lila sitting there, seemingly waiting for me. Nina, with her usual sharp wit, remarked that I didn't look too happy. Her response took me off guard. I had expected her to be gloating, but instead, she sounded almost sympathetic. Lila remained silent, her eyes fixed on the table. Irritated, I confronted them, asking if they were happy now, mentioning that Lila hadn't slept the previous night. When Nina asked if I was okay with everything, I firmly stated that I was far from okay. I recounted the disaster of the previous night, describing the fire at my apartment and my frustration at finding refuge in a seedy bar. Nina explained that Lila had contacted my parents, located Nathan, and tracked me down, visiting several places to find out where I was. At the last location, my state had shocked them. Frustrated, I questioned why Lila had gone to such lengths, accusing her of gloating over my misfortune and walking all over me. I assumed my parents had asked her to look after me. Looking at Lila for the first time, I noticed her shoulders were shaking, and she was crying. Feeling defeated, I sank into a chair and stared at the woman who still held my heart. Nina, with a stern look, pulled several things out of her pockets. A dinner receipt, a clothing purchase certificate, and a charred box containing the ring. With an air of annoyance, she mentioned finding them while she was washing my clothes and urged me to explain the meaning of these objects to Lila. Embarrassed, I stared at the receipts and the box, feeling my face flush. Lila had stopped crying by now and was looking directly at me. Before I could embarrass myself any further, I turned to Lila, demanding to know why she had gone with Victor and why she had tried to hide her face when she saw me. She sighed, explaining that Victor had come to pick her up after hearing about the fire. He had wanted to check if anything in my apartment could be salvaged. When she saw me in such a bad state on the side of the road, she had instinctively decided to invite me to her place. It was a misguided attempt to help, nothing more. Lila urged me to stop being unreasonable, emphasizing that she cared about me more than I deserved. Nina admonished me, pointing out that Lila wasn't doing well either. It slowly dawned on me that I had completely misinterpreted the events of the past 24 hours. I realized Nina had never tried to ruin my relationship with Lila. In fact, she had been supportive of both of us. I saw now how unfair and insulting my accusations had been. Nina encouraged us to focus on the love and connection we shared, rather than suspicion and negativity. It's important to trust each other and communicate openly, she said. I understand that you're protective of Lila, but my intentions have always been sincere and respectful. I genuinely care about her and want her to be happy. I hope you can see that and put aside any doubts or hostility you might have toward me. I took a deep breath and turned to Lila, realizing just how much I had hurt her. Nina added, Lila was thinking about ending things with you, especially since Victor always remembers important dates and details that you tend to forget. Just let me explain. Lila loves you, but it seems like she felt you weren't reciprocating the way she needed. She thought you were about to break up with her. I didn't agree with Nina's perspective and made my thoughts clear. If you weren't so inattentive to important dates and other details, both of you would probably be much happier now, I said, my voice tinged with frustration. It's incredibly hard for me to protect you, especially when you're acting so thoughtless, like yesterday. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt like an utter fool, and the sting of that realization stayed with me, haunting me for the rest of the day. Suddenly hit me, Nina had been on my side all along. Reflecting on my mistakes from the previous day, I realized I had let my negativity cloud my judgment. I had assumed the worst in every situation. Sitting there, I was overcome with a deep sense of stupidity. As I stared at the receipt in my hand, I remembered our reservation at Del Rio's, a place I had hoped to take Lila to make the evening unforgettable for her. But it had been canceled because a wealthy man had booked the entire restaurant. Despite Nina's dismissive remarks about Del Rio's, I defended it. It's the best place in the city, I told them. I had planned it for Valentine's Day, even got a table, but then it was canceled. I wanted Lila to understand how much effort I'd put into this night, how much I had wanted to make it perfect for her. I told them about the effort I'd gone through to buy a new suit, noting Nina's shocked expression. She seemed amazed that I, a simple man who usually wore jeans and a t-shirt, had gone out of my way to buy something special. Both Nina and Lila seemed stunned by this revelation, and though I wished the circumstances were different, I couldn't help but enjoy their reactions. As I held the ring, memories came rushing back, and suddenly, I knew what I needed to do. I dropped to one knee in front of Lila, taking her hands in mine. My heart raced as I admitted my unease about the future, how I wasn't the most impressive guy, nor the best at remembering important dates. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I loved her deeply. I placed the ring box in her hands and intertwined our fingers. With all the courage I could muster, I asked her to marry me. Nina was stunned, her eyes wide in surprise. Lila's tears started to flow, and the room fell into an intense, almost sacred silence. I glanced at Nina for a moment before returning my gaze to Lila. Lila slowly opened the box in her hands, revealing a ring that shone as brilliantly as she did. Her trembling fingers gently removed the ring and, with delicate care, slid it onto the fourth finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly, like it had been meant for her. I had been told by the jeweler that the ring would need resizing to fit her, but my shock quickly turned into joy when Lila wrapped her arms around me and pulled me close. She told me she would marry me, and her hot tears mingled with mine as she kissed my cheek. We embraced tightly, and I glanced at Nina, who was also in tears. We all shared a moment, a mix of joy and emotion that was palpable. Lila's eyes were open wide, filled with something unspoken, a look I couldn't quite interpret. Then, unexpectedly, Nina pulled Lila into her arms, embracing her with the same intensity. As both women cried, gazing at the ring in awe, I watched them in silence for a moment, then sat back down, feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of the emotions swirling around the room. Just then, the phone rang. The answering machine clicked on, and Victor's voice filled the room, expressing his concerns about me being the right guy for Lila. He suggested inviting her to dinner to talk things over. Before either of us could react, Nina picked up the phone and cut him off. "Lila's not interested in you or anyone else," she said firmly. "She's found someone special." She told him to leave her alone and hung up, her anger clear. Nina burst out laughing, and soon Lila joined in. I couldn't help but laugh too. Nina's sudden fury toward Victor surprised me, but it also made me realize that she didn't just tolerate me. She actually had some sympathy for me. Or at least, she was on my side in this whole mess. Later that evening, as we lay together in Lila's bed, she rested her head gently on my chest. The soft light from the bedside lamp illuminated the engagement ring she was admiring, casting a warm, glowing atmosphere even in the dim lighting. The ring sparkled in the quiet room. As I strained my eyes to focus, I noticed a single tear shimmering in her eye. Concern washed over me, and I cautiously asked her, "What's wrong, Lila?" She hesitated for a moment before quietly replying, "Nothing's wrong. Everything feels so incredibly right. Perfect." Her voice was filled with warmth, and then, with a tenderness that made my heart swell, she whispered the words I had longed to hear. "I love you, Caleb." The days leading up to our wedding were filled with eager anticipation. Lila's joy was contagious. A smile never left her face. Nina was by our side every step of the way, helping Lila with all the wedding preparations. I came to realize how wrong I had been about Nina. She was truly a good person, and I felt a deep sense of regret for ever thinking she wanted to come between us. As for Victor, he made several attempts to reach Lila, but thankfully, she avoided any contact or meetings with him. I grew more and more confident in her love and loyalty. Just before the wedding, Lila surprised me with some exciting news. One evening, she stayed late at work, and I began to worry. But when she returned an hour later, she couldn't hold back her excitement. "You're going to be a father," she told me, her eyes sparkling with joy. For a moment, I was speechless, unable to process the words. Was this real, or was she playing a prank on me? But then it hit me. I was happier than I had ever been. My dear Lila and I were going to have a family. The future I had always dreamed of was unfolding right before my eyes, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. To top it all off, Nina had wonderful news of her own. Her boyfriend had finally made up his mind and asked her to marry him. She was overjoyed, and I couldn't help but share in her happiness. It seemed like everything was falling into place for all of us.